The sound of my wife's laughter drifting down through the basement ceiling should have been music to my ears. Instead, it made my skin crawl like fingernails on a chalkboard. I was hunched over my workbench, putting the finishing touches on a custom dining table for the Hendersons, when Julia's voice carried down through the heating vents, along with her best friend Sonia's giggling. "God, I hope Brandon shows up tonight," Julia said, her voice thick with anticipation. "I actually shaved everywhere for him." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The women upstairs erupted in laughter, and I felt my hand tighten around the sandpaper until my knuckles went white. Brandon Ellis. Real estate developer, country club regular, and apparently the reason my wife of 8 years had been spending extra time at the gym lately. "You're so bad," Sonia squealed. "What if Nick finds out?" "Nick?" Julia's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Please, he's too busy playing with his little wood projects to notice anything. Besides, he'd never have the balls to do anything about it even if he did know." I set down my tools carefully, fighting the urge to march upstairs and confront them both right then and there. But Nick Gardner didn't make rash decisions anymore. The Army had taught me patience, planning, and precision. 3 things that were about to serve me very well. "You should see the texts Brandon's been sending me," Julia continued. "He wants to meet me at his condo after the charity gala tonight. Says he has a surprise for me." "What kind of surprise?" Sonia asked breathlessly. "The kind that involves champagne, silk sheets, and no clothes," Julia replied, and they both dissolved into giggles again. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, counting to 10 like my therapist had taught me after I came back from Afghanistan. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd survived 2 tours of duty dodging IEDs and sniper fire, only to get my heart blown apart in my own basement by my cheating wife. The charity gala. Of course, the annual Millbrook Country Club fundraiser that Julia had been planning for months. She'd bought a new dress, gotten her hair done, even splurged on a professional makeup artist. I'd assumed it was all for the benefit of impressing the other wives and climbing another rung on the social ladder. Turns out, it was all for Brandon Ellis. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly picked up my sandpaper, pretending to be absorbed in my work. Sonia appeared at the bottom of the steps, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer outfit looking out of place in my workshop. "Oh, hi, Nick," she said with fake sweetness. "Didn't know you were down here?" "Just finishing up a project," I replied without looking up. "You ladies getting ready for tonight?" "Mm-hmm," she hummed, studying me with calculating eyes. "Julia looks absolutely stunning in her new dress. She's going to turn every head at that party." The subtext was clear. She was fishing to see if I suspected anything, probably getting off on the drama of it all. Sonia lived for gossip and conflict, like a vampire lived for blood. "I'm sure she will," I said evenly. "She always does." Sonia lingered for another moment, clearly disappointed by my lack of reaction, then headed back upstairs. I heard her whisper something to Julia, followed by more muffled conversation. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Miles Brennan. My old Army buddy ran an auto repair shop on the other side of town and had been trying to get me to come out for beers for months. Tonight seemed like the perfect opportunity. "Miles, it's Nick. You free tonight? I might need a favor." "Course, brother. What's going on?" "I'll explain later. Just meet me at the Stagger Inn around 11. And Miles, bring your lockout kit." "This sounds interesting. You finally gonna tell Julia what you really think of her book club friends?" "Something like that." I hung up and went back to sanding, but my mind was already working through possibilities. Julia thought I was too weak, too passive to fight back. She'd clearly forgotten that I'd spent 6 years in the military, including 2 tours in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I'd learned a thing or two about strategy, reconnaissance, and psychological warfare. The gala started at 7. By my calculation, Julia and her girlfriends would be fashionably late, arriving around 7:30. The event would run until 10, then the after-parties would begin. That gave me plenty of time to set things in motion. I climbed the stairs and found Julia in our bedroom, standing in front of the full-length mirror in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people made in a week. She looked beautiful, I had to admit, which made what she was doing hurt that much more. "You look nice," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced at me in the mirror, her expression softening slightly. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation that had become her default expression. "Thanks. Are you sure you don't want to come tonight? It's going to be a really good party." "Nah, I've got some work to catch up on. Besides, you know how I feel about the country club crowd." "Your loss," she said, turning back to the mirror to apply lipstick. The same shade of red she'd worn on our wedding day. "Julia," I said quietly, "do you ever think about us? About what we used to be?" Her hand paused halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when's the last time we actually talked? Really talked, not just logistics about bills and schedules and whose turn it is to take out the trash." She set down the lipstick and faced me, her expression guarded. "We're talking now. Are we? Because it feels like we're just two strangers sharing a mortgage." For a moment, I thought she might actually open up, might tell me what was wrong, what I'd done to push her away, why she'd decided that our marriage wasn't worth fighting for. Instead, she picked up her purse and checked her phone. "I'm already running late. Sonia's picking me up in 10 minutes. "Right. Of course." I watched her gather her things, noting how she tucked her phone into her purse with the screen facing down, how she avoided making eye contact, how she checked her appearance one more time before heading for the door. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder. The front door slammed, leaving me alone in our house with nothing but the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I waited until I saw Sonia's BMW pull out of the driveway, then went to work. The first thing I did was check Julia's laptop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter, probably figuring I was too technologically inept to get past her password. She was wrong. After 15 minutes of trying variations of important dates, pet names, and her mother's maiden name, I struck gold with Brandon E. 2023. Subtle. Her email inbox was a treasure trove of evidence. Dozens of messages from Brandon Ellis, starting innocuously enough 3 months ago with work-related questions about a property development project Julia's PR firm was handling, but they quickly escalated into something much more personal. "Had lunch with your husband yesterday at the club," one message read. "Nice guy, but seems pretty checked out. You deserve someone who appreciates what he has." Julia's response made my stomach turn. "Nick's been distant for years. I'm starting to think we married too young. We've grown into completely different people." I scrolled through weeks of increasingly intimate exchanges. Brandon complimenting her intelligence, her beauty, her ambition. Julia complaining about me, about how boring our marriage had become, about how she felt trapped in a life that no longer fit her. The most recent message, sent just 2 hours ago, was from Brandon. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear the black dress. I have champagne chilling and a surprise that's going to change everything." Julia's reply, "I'm so nervous and excited I can barely think straight. Tonight feels like the beginning of something amazing." I printed out the most damning exchanges and tucked them into a folder. Then I moved on to her social media accounts, which painted an even clearer picture of her deception. Dozens of photos from work events and girls' nights that I now realized were actually dates with Brandon. The two of them at expensive restaurants, art gallery openings, wine tastings, always careful not to appear too intimate in the photos, but the body language was unmistakable. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Pike. The 70-something retired teacher had lived next door for 20 years and had a front-row seat to everyone's business on Maple Street. That handsome man in the silver BMW was here again today while you were at work. He and Julia sat on your back deck for over an hour. Thought you should know. I texted back, "Thanks, Mrs. Pike. I appreciate you looking out for me." Her response came immediately. "That's what neighbors are for, dear. Your wife is a fool if she doesn't appreciate what she has." Mrs. Pike had always been fond of me, ever since I'd helped her install a new mailbox and fixed her back steps without being asked. She'd also never particularly liked Julia, though she'd been too polite to say so directly until now. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down to think through my options. I could confront Julia directly, but that would just lead to denials, gaslighting, and probably an escalation that would end with her moving in with Brandon while I got stuck with the mortgage and legal bills. I could hire a private investigator and divorce attorney, go the traditional route. But that would take months, cost a fortune, and Julia was smart enough to cover her tracks once she knew I was onto her. Or I could do what I did best: gather intelligence, plan a strategic response, and execute with precision. I called Miles back. "Change of plans. Meet me at Brandon Ellis's condo building downtown. Bring a camera with a good zoom lens." "Nick, what the hell is going on?" "My wife is cheating on me with some real estate asshole, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it." There was a long pause. "You sure about this, brother? Once you go down this road, there's no coming back." "I'm sure. Julia made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences." The Millbrook Country Club was only 15 minutes from downtown, which meant Julia and Brandon would probably arrive at his condo around 10:30. That gave me just enough time to get into position and document whatever happened next. I changed into dark clothes and grabbed my old military binoculars from the closet. As I was heading for the door, my phone rang. Julia's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to check in. The party is amazing. You really should have come." "I'm sure it is. Having fun?" "Oh yes, the food is incredible and the band is fantastic. Sonia is already a little tipsy." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'll probably be pretty late, so don't worry if I'm not home until after midnight." "No problem. I'll probably be asleep anyway." "Okay, love you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Love you too." I hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment. She'd just lied to my face while standing in a room full of people who probably knew exactly what she was planning to do later. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. Almost. I met Miles in the parking lot of Brandon's building, a gleaming 30-story tower of glass and steel that screamed new money and overcompensation. His unit was on the 22nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the city lights and absolutely no privacy. "Nice place," Miles said, adjusting the telephoto lens on his camera. "This guy must be loaded. Real estate development probably makes more in a month than I make in a year. Money ain't everything, brother. Tell that to my wife." We positioned ourselves across the street in the parking lot of a closed restaurant, with a clear line of sight to Brandon's windows. The lights were on, and I could see him moving around inside, straightening pillows and adjusting what looked like candles on his dining room table. "How long we gonna wait?" Miles asked. "However long it takes." At 10:47 p.m., a silver BMW pulled into the building's parking garage. My heart started pounding as I watched the elevator indicator climb to the 22nd floor. Through the binoculars, I watched Brandon open his door and embrace a woman in a black dress. My wife. She stepped into his arms like she belonged there, tilting her face up for a kiss that lasted long enough to make me feel sick. "You getting this?" I asked Miles. "Every second of it." They moved to his living room, where Brandon popped open a bottle of champagne and poured 2 glasses. They toasted to something I couldn't hear, then sat down on his couch. Julia kicked off her heels and curled up against him like a cat. I watched my wife of 8 years transform into someone I didn't recognize. She was animated, laughing, touching Brandon's arm and face with an intimacy that we hadn't shared in months, maybe years. "Want me to keep shooting?" Miles asked quietly. "Yeah, get everything." Brandon stood up and disappeared into what I assumed was his bedroom, returning with a small jewelry box. He got down on one knee in front of Julia, and even from across the street, I could see her hands fly to her mouth in shock. "Holy shit," Miles breathed. "Is he proposing?" I felt like I was going to throw up. Julia was nodding frantically, tears streaming down her face as Brandon slipped something onto her finger. They kissed again, longer this time, and then Brandon swept her up in his arms and carried her toward the bedroom. "That's enough," I said, lowering the binoculars. "I've seen enough." Miles lowered his camera and looked at me with concern. "Nick, I'm sorry, man. This is really fucked up." "Yeah, it is, but now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." We drove back to the Stagger Inn in silence, where I proceeded to drink enough whiskey to numb the pain in my chest. Miles kept me company, occasionally offering words of encouragement or suggestions for revenge that ranged from juvenile to felonious. "You could always key his car," he suggested. "Too obvious." "Sugar in the gas tank?" "Doesn't actually work. Urban myth." "What about hiring a hooker to show up at his office?" I considered this. "Interesting, but too risky. I need something that can't be traced back to me." "So what's the plan?" I finished my whiskey and set the glass down on the bar. "I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. But first, I need to do some more research." I got home at 2 a.m. to find Julia's car in the driveway. She was already in bed, pretending to be asleep, still wearing her makeup and smelling like another man's cologne. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her fake sleep, then went downstairs to my workshop. I had work to do. I woke up at dawn with a hangover and a crystal-clear sense of purpose. Julia was still asleep, probably exhausted from her evening of betrayal and future planning. I made coffee quietly and sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the photos Miles had taken the night before. The images were damning. Julia and Brandon embracing, kissing, toasting with champagne, and the moment he got down on one knee. In several shots, you could clearly see Julia's face, radiant with happiness I hadn't seen in years. The engagement ring glittered on her finger, a massive diamond that probably cost more than my truck. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Pike. "Saw you come home very late last night. Everything all right?" I texted back, "Everything's fine. Just had some things to take care of. If you need anything, dear, don't hesitate to ask. Some of us still believe in loyalty and commitment." The woman was a treasure. Julia stumbled into the kitchen around 9, wearing one of my old army t-shirts and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. She'd washed off her makeup and hidden the engagement ring, but I could see the tan line on her finger where it had been. "Morning," she mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. "Good morning. How was the party?" "Fine, good. Raised a lot of money for the children's hospital." "That's nice. See anyone interesting?" She paused with the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Just wondering if any of the usual suspects were there. The Hendersons, the Morgans, Brandon Ellis." At the mention of Brandon's name, her entire body went rigid. "I think Brandon was there, yes. I didn't really talk to him much." The lies came so easily to her now. I wondered how long she'd been practicing. "Well, I should get to the shop. The Henderson table needs to be delivered today." "Okay. I'll probably be home late again tonight. We're doing damage control on the Morrison account." Another lie. According to her calendar, which I'd checked on her laptop, she had no client meetings scheduled for the entire week. "No problem. I might grab dinner with Miles anyway." She nodded absently, already scrolling through her phone, probably texting her new fiancé. I spent the morning at my workshop, but my mind wasn't on furniture. I was planning the most important project of my life, the complete and total destruction of Julia and Brandon's perfect little fantasy. The first step was intelligence gathering. I needed to know everything about Brandon Ellis, his business, his habits, his weaknesses. I started with public records and social media, building a comprehensive profile of my target. Brandon Ellis, age 42, divorced, no children. CEO of Ellis Development Group, specializing in luxury condominiums and commercial properties. Net worth estimated at around $15 million. Member of 3 different country clubs, drove a BMW and a Porsche, owned a boat and a ski house in Vermont. His social media presence was exactly what I'd expected. Carefully curated photos of expensive toys, exotic vacations, and networking events with other rich assholes. He clearly saw himself as a player, a man who took what he wanted without regard for the consequences. But everyone had vulnerabilities, and I was good at finding them. I dug deeper into his business records and found something interesting. Ellis Development Group had been involved in a zoning dispute 2 years ago, accused of bribing city officials to approve a controversial high-rise project. The charges were eventually dropped, but the local newspaper coverage suggested there was more to the story. I called the reporter who'd covered the case, a woman named Sarah Chen, who worked for the Millbrook Gazette. Sarah Chen. Ms. Chen, my name is Nick Gardner. I'm calling about a story you wrote a couple years ago regarding Ellis Development Group and the zoning controversy. Oh, that. What about it? I have reason to believe Brandon Ellis might be involved in some other questionable activities. Would you be interested in hearing about it? There was a pause. What kind of activities? The kind that might interest the State Ethics Commission and his investors. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me for coffee this afternoon? We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown, far from anywhere Julia or Brandon might see us. Sarah turned out to be a sharp, ambitious reporter in her 30s who clearly had no love for corrupt businessmen. Ellis has been on my radar for years, she told me over lattes, but he's careful, and he has good lawyers. What do you have? I showed her some of the financial documents I'd pulled from public records, highlighting several transactions that looked suspicious. I didn't mention the affair or my personal motivations. This needed to look like a legitimate investigation. This is interesting, she said, studying the papers, but I'd need more to build a case. Documentation, witnesses, something concrete. What if I could get you access to his personal communications? Emails, text messages, that sort of thing? Her eyes lit up. That would be a game changer. But how would you get access to something like that? Let me worry about that. If I can deliver, would you be willing to run with the story? Absolutely. Ellis has been skating by on charm and connections for too long. If he's dirty, the public deserves to know. We shook hands, and I felt the first piece of my plan click into place. That evening, while Julia was supposedly working late, I paid a visit to the Millbrook Country Club. I wasn't a member, but I knew the layout from the few events Julia had dragged me to over the years. More importantly, I knew that Brandon Ellis had a standing reservation at the bar every Tuesday night. I positioned myself at a corner table with a clear view of the bar and waited. Sure enough, Brandon arrived at 7:30, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and Italian leather shoes. He ordered an expensive scotch and checked his phone constantly, probably texting with Julia. I watched him for an hour, studying his habits and interactions. He was clearly popular with the staff, tipping generously and calling everyone by name. Several other members stopped by his table to chat, and he worked the room like a politician running for office. But I also noticed something else. He left his phone unattended on the bar when he went to the bathroom. Just for a few minutes, but long enough for someone with the right skills to do some damage. I finished my beer and left, already formulating the next phase of my plan. Back home, Julia was waiting for me with a guilty expression and another set of lies about her evening. I listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, while mentally cataloging every deception. "How was dinner with Miles?" she asked. "Good. We talked about old times." That's nice. I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early. I'm exhausted. Sure thing. Sweet dreams. She kissed my cheek, and I caught another whiff of Brandon's cologne. The woman had no shame. After she went upstairs, I sat in my workshop and finalized my strategy. Julia and Brandon thought they were so smart, so careful, so untouchable. They were about to learn that they'd picked the wrong man to betray. Phase 1 would be exposure, making sure everyone in their social and professional circles knew exactly what kind of people they really were. Phase 2 would be consequences, using their own arrogance and carelessness against them to destroy the life they were trying to build together. Phase 3 would be justice, making sure they both paid a price that fit their crimes. I opened my laptop and started typing. By the time I was finished, I had a detailed timeline, a list of targets, and a comprehensive plan that would systematically dismantle everything Julia and Brandon cared about. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to discover that I played for keeps. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. While Julia was at her fake job, I drove to Brandon's office building and spent 2 hours in the parking garage, studying the security cameras and timing the guard rotations. Ellis Development Group occupied the entire 15th floor, with Brandon's corner office offering a panoramic view of the city he was helping to reshape. I'd brought along a small device that Miles had acquired through his network of military contacts, a signal booster that could intercept and clone cell phone data from anyone within a 50-foot radius. Technically illegal, but nearly impossible to trace if used properly. I positioned myself in the coffee shop across the street from Brandon's building and activated the device during the lunch hour, when foot traffic was heaviest. Within 30 minutes, I had access to Brandon's phone, including his text messages, emails, and call history. The messages between him and Julia were even more damning than I'd expected. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a complete life together. Brandon had already put a down payment on a house in an exclusive suburb 2 towns over. Julia had been secretly moving money from our joint accounts into a personal savings account. They'd even discussed the best way to handle the divorce to minimize Brandon's exposure to negative publicity. But the real gold mine was Brandon's business communications. Sarah Chen had been right. The man was dirty as hell. Messages with city officials that clearly showed quid pro quo arrangements. Communications with investors that misrepresented the financial status of several projects. Evidence of tax evasion, environmental violations, and at least 3 instances of fraud. I forwarded the most incriminating messages to Sarah along with a note. This is just the beginning. More to follow. Then I started working on the personal destruction. Julia's best friend Sonia had always rubbed me the wrong way, but she was about to become my most valuable asset. The woman lived for drama and gossip, and she had a social media following of over 10,000 people who hung on her every word. I created a fake Instagram account and started following several of Julia and Sonia's mutual friends. Then I began posting anonymous tips about Julia's affair, always with just enough detail to be believable, but not enough to be traced back to me. Heard through the grapevine that a certain PR executive has been getting very cozy with one of her married clients. The husband has no idea, but everyone at the country club is talking about it. Within hours, the post had dozens of comments and shares. The Millbrook social scene was a small, incestuous world, where rumors spread like wildfire. My phone rang around 3 p.m. It was Mrs. Pike. "Nick, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I thought you should know that your wife came home about an hour ago with a man I didn't recognize. They're on your back deck right now, and they seem to be having quite an intimate conversation." "Thank you, Mrs. Pike. I appreciate the heads up. Should I call the police?" "No, that won't be necessary. But if you have a camera handy, it might be worth documenting what you see, for insurance purposes." Mrs. Pike was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. "I understand completely, dear." I left work early and drove home, parking 2 blocks away and approaching through the woods behind our house. Sure enough, Julia and Brandon were on our back deck, sharing a bottle of wine and making plans for their future. My wife was wearing the engagement ring openly now, apparently confident that I wouldn't be home for hours. I used my phone to record several minutes of their conversation, capturing Brandon's promises to take care of Julia and her complaints about being stuck in a loveless marriage with a man who didn't appreciate her. "Nick's a good guy," Brandon said, "but he's never going to be able to give you the life you deserve. You're meant for bigger things." "I know," Julia replied. "I just feel guilty sometimes. He's not a bad person." "Guilt is a luxury you can't afford. You have to think about your own happiness." "You're right. I just want this to be over so we can start our real life together. Soon, baby. Very soon." They kissed, and I felt that familiar rage building in my chest. But I controlled it, channeled it, used it to fuel my determination. That evening, I made my first direct move. Julia came home around 7, full of apologies for being late and stories about client meetings that I knew were fictional. I listened patiently, then suggested we go out to dinner at the Stagger Inn. "Really? That place is kind of a dive, isn't it?" "Come on, we never go out anymore. It'll be fun." She agreed reluctantly, probably figuring it was easier than arguing. What she didn't know was that Tuesday night was trivia night at the Stagger Inn, and half the country club crowd would be there trying to prove how smart they were. We arrived at 8 p.m. and found the place packed with familiar faces. I made sure to greet everyone enthusiastically, playing the role of the devoted husband out for a rare evening with his beloved wife. "Nick! Julia!" called out Tom Henderson, one of Julia's PR clients. "Great to see you two together. You hardly ever come to these things." "I've been trying to get Julia to come out more," I said, putting my arm around her waist. "She works so hard, sometimes I have to drag her away from the office." Julia smiled tightly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. We found a table near the bar, where I had a perfect view of the room and everyone in it. Julia kept checking her phone, probably wondering why Brandon wasn't responding to her messages. What she didn't know was that I'd used my access to his phone to block her number temporarily. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom and made a quick stop at the bar, where I struck up a conversation with several people I knew from previous visits. "How are things with you and Julia?" asked Mike Peterson, a guy I'd known since high school. "Great," I said. "Actually, we're thinking about renewing our vows for our 10th anniversary next year. Really recommitting to each other, you know?" "That's awesome, man. You guys are lucky to have found each other." I glanced over at Julia, who was still frantically texting. "Yeah, we really are." When I returned to the table, Julia was agitated and distracted. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just work stuff." "Maybe you should put the phone away. We're supposed to be having a date night." She reluctantly slipped the phone into her purse, but I could see her fingers twitching with the need to check it. The trivia questions started, and our table quickly filled up with other couples looking to form a team. Julia tried to participate, but her heart wasn't in it. She kept glancing toward the door, probably hoping Brandon would magically appear. "Julia seems distracted tonight," commented Sarah Peterson, Mike's wife. "She's been under a lot of stress at work," I explained. "Big client presentation coming up." "Oh, that's right. Didn't you say she was working with Ellis Development Group? Brandon Ellis is such a charming man." I felt Julia stiffen beside me. "Yes, he's been very professional to work with." "I heard he's single again," Sarah continued innocently. "Divorced last year, I think. Such a shame when marriages don't work out." "Yes," Julia said quietly. "It really is." I squeezed her hand under the table. "Good thing we don't have to worry about that, right, honey?" She managed a weak smile. "Right." The evening continued with more small talk, more questions about our marriage, more opportunities for Julia to lie to people she'd known for years. By the time we left, she was practically vibrating with anxiety. "That was fun," I said as we walked to the car. "We should do it more often." "Sure. Whatever. You seemed a little off tonight. Are you feeling okay? I'm fine, Nick. Just tired. Maybe you should take a vacation. Get away from work for a while. She looked at me sharply. What do you mean? I mean you've been working a lot of late nights lately. Maybe you need a break. I can't take time off right now. Things are too busy. With the Ellis account? Another sharp look. Among other things. We drove home in silence, Julia staring out the window, while I hummed along to the radio. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out if I suspected anything. Back at the house, she immediately went upstairs to call Brandon from the privacy of our bedroom. I stayed downstairs and listened to the muffled sounds of her voice through the ceiling, catching fragments of conversation. Don't know why you weren't answering. Acting strange tonight. Think he knows something. I smiled and poured myself a whiskey. Phase 1 was complete. Julia was rattled, paranoid, and starting to make mistakes. Brandon was probably wondering why his phone had been acting up and whether their secret was as safe as they'd thought. Tomorrow, I'd escalate to Phase 2. It was time to start burning down their perfect little world, one lie at a time. But first, I had some emails to send. I woke up at 5 a.m. to find Julia's side of the bed empty. I could hear her voice coming from the bathroom, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. She was on the phone with Brandon, trying to figure out what had gone wrong the night before and whether their secret was still safe. It wasn't. While she was distracted, I accessed her laptop one more time and downloaded everything I needed: emails, photos, financial records, and a detailed timeline of her affair. Then I uploaded it all to a secure cloud storage account and prepared for the final phase of my plan. Julia emerged from the bathroom looking haggard and stressed. She'd barely slept, and it showed. "Morning," I said cheerfully. "Coffee?" "Please." She sat at the kitchen table and stared at her phone while I made breakfast, probably waiting for Brandon to text her back. What she didn't know was that Brandon was dealing with problems of his own this morning. Sarah Chen's story had gone live at 6 a.m., and it was already making waves. The headline read, "Local developer accused of corruption and fraud." The article detailed Brandon's questionable business practices, complete with documentation and quotes from anonymous sources. His office phone was probably ringing off the hook with calls from angry investors and nervous city officials. "Anything interesting in the news?" I asked, sliding a plate of eggs in front of Julia. "No, nothing important." She picked at her food while scrolling through social media, where the rumors about her affair were starting to gain traction. Sonia had shared the anonymous Instagram post with her own commentary. "Some people have no respect for marriage or commitment. Disgusting." The irony was beautiful. "I have to go to work early today," Julia announced, standing up abruptly. "Big meeting?" "Something like that." She kissed my cheek and headed for the door, probably planning to meet Brandon and figure out their next move. I watched her drive away, then got to work on the final preparations. First, I called my lawyer and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Then I called my bank and put a freeze on all our joint accounts. Finally, I loaded the photos and documents into my truck and headed for the country club. The Millbrook Country Club had a strict policy about posting notices on their bulletin board. Everything had to be approved by the membership committee, but they didn't have any rules about leaving anonymous packages in members' lockers. I spent 2 hours systematically visiting every locker in the men's and women's changing rooms, leaving identical packages containing photos of Julia and Brandon's affair, copies of their romantic emails, and a detailed timeline of their relationship. Each package was labeled, "Thought you should know what kind of people we're dealing with." By noon, the country club was buzzing with gossip and outrage. I positioned myself at the bar and watched the drama unfold as members discovered the packages and began sharing the contents with each other. "I can't believe Julia Gardner would do something like this," I heard one woman say. "And with Brandon Ellis, of all people. Didn't his divorce just get finalized last year?" Poor Nick. He seems like such a nice man. This is absolutely scandalous. They should both be thrown out of the club. I nursed my beer and soaked in the righteous indignation of people who'd been fooled by Julia's perfect wife act for years. These were her friends, her social circle, the people whose opinions she valued most. And now they all knew exactly what she was. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Something's happened. Meet me at home immediately." I texted back, "Can't. In a meeting with a client. What's wrong?" "Just come home, please." "I'll be there as soon as I can." I finished my beer and drove home slowly, taking the scenic route through town. I wanted Julia to stew in her panic for as long as possible. I found her pacing in our living room, tears streaming down her face and her phone clutched in her shaking hands. "Nick, thank God you're here. Something terrible has happened." "What's wrong?" Someone has been spreading lies about me. Horrible, vicious lies." I sat down on the couch and looked at her with concern. "What kind of lies?" "They're saying I'm having an affair with Brandon Ellis. It's all over social media, and people at the club are talking about it. Someone even sent photos to my boss." "Photos of what?" She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. "They're not real. They can't be real. Someone must have doctored them or something." I stood up and put my arms around her, feeling her body shake against mine. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Julia, look at me." She raised her tear-stained face to mine. "Are you having an affair with Brandon Ellis?" "No, I swear to you, Nick, I would never do that. I love you." The lies came so easily, even now, even with the evidence scattered all over town and her world crumbling around her. "Then we'll figure this out," I said softly. "We'll find out who's doing this and make them pay." She nodded frantically. "Yes, we have to. My reputation, my career, everything is ruined." "Not everything. You still have me." She looked up at me with desperate hope. "Really? You believe me?" "Of course I believe you. You're my wife." The relief on her face was heartbreaking. She actually thought she could lie her way out of this, that I was stupid enough to ignore the evidence of my own eyes. My phone rang. It was Brandon. "Don't answer it," Julia said quickly. "Why not? If you're innocent, there's no reason not to talk to him." I answered the call and put it on speaker. "Nick, thank God. I need to talk to you about what's happening." "What's happening, Brandon?" "Someone is trying to destroy both Julia and me with fabricated evidence. I think it might be one of my business competitors trying to ruin my reputation." "That's terrible." "What kind of evidence?" "Photos, emails, text messages, all fake but very convincing. Julia and I have a professional relationship, nothing more." I looked at Julia, who was nodding frantically. "I see. And you have no idea who might be behind this?" "None. But Nick, I want you to know that I have nothing but respect for you and your marriage. Julia talks about you all the time." "Does she? What does she say?" There was a pause. "Just that she loves you very much. That you're a good man." "That's nice to hear. Brandon, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Where were you last Tuesday night around 10:30? Another pause, longer this time. I was at home. Why?" "Just curious. Someone claimed they saw you and Julia together that night. But if you were home..." "Yes, I was definitely at home. All evening." I looked at Julia, whose face had gone completely white. "That's good to know. Well, I should let you go. I'm sure you have a lot to deal with today. Nick, I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to get to the bottom of this. Whoever is responsible will pay. I'm sure they will. Take care, Brandon." I hung up and turned to Julia, who was staring at me with growing fear. "He seemed pretty upset," I observed. "Yes, we both are." "Julia, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." "Okay." Are you wearing an engagement ring? Her hand flew instinctively to her purse, where she'd hidden the ring that morning. What? No, why would you ask that? Because one of the photos shows you wearing a very large diamond ring on your left hand. If these photos are fake, like you claim, then you should be able to explain that. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact moment she realized that her lies weren't going to save her. Nick. Show me your hands, Julia. She reluctantly held out her hands, and I could clearly see the tan line on her ring finger where Brandon's engagement ring had been. You want to try again? She collapsed onto the couch, all pretense finally abandoned. How long have you known? Long enough. What are you going to do? I sat down across from her and pulled out a manila envelope. These are divorce papers. I'm filing for irreconcilable differences, and I'm asking for half of everything we own, including the money you've been hiding in your secret savings account. Her eyes widened. How did you? I also have copies of all your communications with Brandon, documentation of your financial infidelity, and sworn statements from multiple witnesses who saw you together. Your lawyer is going to advise you to settle quickly and quietly. Nick, please. We can work this out. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I'll end it with Brandon. We can go to counseling. It's too late for that, Julia. You made your choice. What about forgiveness? What about our vows? I stood up and looked down at her, feeling nothing but contempt. You broke those vows the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you. Now you get to live with the consequences. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Julia? You might want to check the news. Brandon's having a pretty bad day, too. I left her sitting in our living room, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she'd thrown away for a fantasy that was never going to come true. Outside, Mrs. Pike was waiting by her mailbox with a knowing smile. How did it go, dear? Exactly as planned. Good. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences. I drove to my lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in months. Julia and Brandon had thought they were so clever, so careful, so untouchable. They'd underestimated the quiet man in the basement, the boring husband who was too weak to fight back. They'd been wrong about everything. By evening, the story had spread throughout the entire town. Julia's affair was the talk of social media, Brandon's business was under investigation by the state attorney general, and both of their reputations were in ruins. I sat in my workshop with a beer, listening to the sounds of Julia packing her things upstairs. She'd be gone by morning, probably moving in with Brandon until they could figure out their next move. But there wouldn't be a next move. Brandon's investors were pulling out, his city contracts were being reviewed, and his assets were being frozen pending the fraud investigation. Julia's PR firm had fired her that afternoon, and her friends had all turned their backs on her. They'd wanted everything. Now they had nothing. My phone buzzed with a text from Miles. Saw the news. You did good, brother. I texted back. Justice served. What's next? I looked around my workshop, at the tools and projects that had always brought me peace, and smiled. Now I build something new.